Yeah, thanks for tuning in. As an accompaniment to my video that I did on retro magazines, I'm doing another video, this one here, about retro books. These are generally my favourites. In fact, they are all my favourites to be precise. Books that I've discovered either organically or just through friends that I've posted that have been interest, or even on one occasion, it's a book that I've also contributed to as well. So it's a very niche field, retro gaming still. Even these days, it's becoming very popular, and there's still a lot out there. So I thought it'd be quite interesting, as with the magazines, to bring all these books into one video that I own. All these books that I own into one video, and so people can see what sort of stuff I like to read, and also hopefully pick them up as well, because I think a lot of this stuff needs to be supported in order to keep our community and all these interviews and articles still published, not only in magazines but also in books. So without further ado, let's have a look back at what I've got here. I've got all sorts of books here from different people, as I say. I'm going to have a look first at a few randoms from Amazon and beyond. And first of all, we've got Florin's ZX Spectrum Hall of Games. Now, Florin, aka Paul Davies, is a friend of mine. He also contributes to Retro Gamer, and here Paul has written about some of his favourite games from back in the 80s on the ZX Spectrum. And what I like about Paul's book here, and enjoyed about it, is each introduction, which I've managed to avoid there, each introduction to a game, it's got these lovely nice colour screenshots, but it places the game in time as well, or quite often it places the game in time, and it will tell you the year the game came out, and also give you some information about what was kind of going on at the time. And Paul's got a very nice, easy style to read as well. So it's a very nice book, available in hardcover, and I assume to download as well, from Fantastic Books Publishing. So that's where you need to go to get Florin's ZX Spectrum Hall of Games. So that's a good start. Next up, keeping the Spectrum theme going, this is actually fiction. It's called The Ballad of Matthew Smith by Steve Trow. I bought this, I think, at a retro show a few years ago, and it's basically a work of fiction based around the life of Matthew Smith, the famous Spectrum coder. So yeah, it's an interesting read, I must say. It's not a particularly long novel, and I did enjoy dipping into it and reading it all. But yeah, it's very different. That's for sure. But if you're interested in gaming and not from a historical perspective, but just for something to read on the beach or wherever, then this is a good book to dip into. And also, I would recommend. I haven't got any copies to hand, but those of you that remember the publisher CRL. There was a guy called Clem Chambers that ran CRL, and Clem's written also a few retro-themed books along the lines of this as well, and well worth checking out. So there we go. Next up, we've got Specky Nation by Dan Whitehead. Dan is a fellow games journalist, and this first Specky Nation is quite a slim book, but it highlights quite a few games that Dan either loved back in the day or thought were very worthy of mentioning. So it's black and white, but there's some really nice writing in there. Dan's got quite a humorous style of writing, and every game that he looks at, he writes really eloquently about. So that's quite a nice little read, and also as it's very obviously about individual games, it's very easy to dip in and out of as well. So that's Specky Nation. And also we've got Dan's follow-up, Specky Nation 2, which is a much more solid read, and this focuses basically on all the licensed games back in the day on the Spectrum. So you've got like all the games based on TV shows, films, and arcade games, I presume, as well. So for instance, you've got Master of the Universe there. Not a particularly colourful book, but that doesn't bother me in the slightest. Really, for me, it's about the words which take you back to the time and the games that we used to play. So lots and lots to read about in Dan's two Specky Nation books there. I don't know if he's working on Specky Nation 3, but that'd be interesting to read. A couple more commercial books now. First of all, we've got Deus Ex Machina, The Best Game You Never Played in Your Life by Mel Croucher. If you don't know Mel, then why not? Because he was one of the trailblazers of the scene in the 80s. Not the most commercially successful, but you could say that certainly the games he produced were some of the most interesting on the ZX Spectrum in particular, especially Deus Ex Machina, which had a soundtrack that ran alongside it, and you listened to, and was designed as more a sort of like mesmeric experience rather than just a game. So a lot of kudos to Mel. For trying to produce something a bit more than your run-of-the-mill shoot 'em ups. They didn't like shooting games. Automata, his company, or is it Automata? I can't remember which way you pronounce it. But anyway, they didn't like shooting games anyway. So unfortunately, they were the popular type of games a lot of the time. But as I say, he did try and do something different, which I think you should always admired for sure. And this is not just about Deus Ex Machina. It's also about his games in general, and also his experiences developing games back in the 80s, and also his career before then in the 70s as well. And it's a really great and really funny read as well. Mel's quite a character, as I'm sure he's been tired of being called after all these years. But he's certainly got plenty of jokes in there, and it's a very entertaining read. I would definitely recommend that book. So, Mel Croucher's Deus Ex Machina. Then we've got Hints and Tips for Video Game Pioneers by Andrew Hewson, who obviously ran Hewson, or Hewson Consultants as they were initially known. They were one of the most successful publishers in the 80s. They struggled a little bit with the transfer over to the 16-bit. They did a few nice 16-bit games, but didn't last much longer in the early 90s. And they're one of my favourite publishers from back in the day, so I really enjoyed reading Andrew's memories of running Hewson and all the games they produced. So this is quite text heavy as well. I won't flick too much through the text of these books because it's not particularly video friendly. But yeah, this is a really good book written by Andrew about his experiences running Hewson back in the day. Obviously lots of chat about all the old games like Uridium and Paradroid, which are featured on the cover here. So there you go. Right, moving swiftly on. Next, I'm going to focus on two particular publishers who I particularly really enjoy their work. The first one is called Bitmap Books, and this is one of their favourite books of mine, and it's called A Gremlin in the Works, and it's written by Mark Hardesty, and basically it's about the Sheffield-based publisher of video games, initially known as Gremlin Graphics in the early mid-80s, and Mark's a Sheffield resident, and he loves the city and obviously the games company Gremlin, and felt that producing this loving tome, and it is really loving, is an absolutely outstanding book, well, two books actually, on this publisher that lasted from I guess 83 or 84 all the way to the end of the 90s. Really colourful. This is different to the other books in that it's colourful, hardback for starters, and it's colourful, and it includes lots of interviews with lots of different people that were involved in Gremlin throughout the years. Obviously Ian Stewart, who's the founder, features quite prominently. Lots of photos from back in the day, and of course screenshots and so on of games as well. I say it's colour, but then I've managed to not find any colour. So there's plenty of information about this company, and it's a great read to dip in and out of as well, all about their various different games, and lots of interviews, as I say, with all the coders and the people who worked at Gremlin. So that's A Gremlin in the Works by Bitmap. Also by Bitmap is another hefty tome, the CRPG book. Now this is one of my favourites again, because I've always been into RPGs, or CRPGs, and what this book does, it's got a variety of contributors, and what it does is it takes a lot of the luminaries of the genre from all throughout the years, 80s, 90s, and more recent as well, and gives you a 2-page breakdown of it, usually from someone always from someone who's a huge fan of the game. So if we look just a couple of random ones, here you've got Betrayal in Antara, which is an old, not heard of that one, that's an old game, and Return to Krondor, which look like old DOS games. And then if you skip forward a little bit more, you get more modern games. There's console games, it's not just PC games, there's console games as well. We've got Breath of Fire 4 here. And then we move into the modern era, the era of AAA, as it says here, multi-platform, and you get features on games such as Mass Effect and Fallout as well. So this is a really great tome, really lovely book to read, a proper coffee table book. But there's also lots to read in it as well. Some of the bitmap books, it's more about pictures rather than the words, and nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like, that's fine. But this one, it really goes in depth, and yeah, I backed it on Kickstarter, I think, and yeah, it's a great book to have a look in. Although it's a little bit heavy, I suppose you can keep doors open with it. Another bitmap book is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, a visual compendium, which is more the visual style that I just was alluding to. But I really love this as well because it's great to look back. As you can see, just looking at the cover, look at all these great sprites here. So you've got Magic Knight there, Horace there from Horace Goes Skiing, Henry from Chucky Egg. That looks like Akari Warriors, Nodes of Yesod, and of course right in the middle you've got the main man himself, Minor Willie. So if you look inside each section, it gives you a bit about publishers such as this, which is Beyond, which is a little bit more to read. And then you also get individual pages about, sorry, not that one, that's covers of the magazines, but you also get individual pages about games themselves. Usually a high-res screenshot in the middle with the writing around the outside, sorry. So really lots to get into here. Not a particularly wordy book, but sometimes you don't feel like reading too much. You just want to look at the nice pictures, and that's the sort of book that you need for that, because it doesn't include a huge amount of in-depth coverage of the games, but it's certainly going to be a really big nostalgia hit for anyone that was a big fan of the Spectrum back in the day. And Technician Ted, yes, it is Technician Ted there as well. Right. So that's bitmap books. They're my favourite bitmap books. Next up is Fusion Retro Publishing, and Fusion Retro Books, I should say, in particular. And they've been going for quite a long time now. They're run by a chap called Chris Wilkins. I've known Chris for a long time, written for many of his magazines and books. First up, I'm going to highlight a couple of their books. First of all, we've got the story of US Gold. US Gold were a big publisher back in the 80s, a very American British software house. And this was by Chris and Roger Keane. Roger, of course, used to work for Newsfield, or used to co-own Newsfield, which did Crash Magazine and so on. And Roger helps Chris put a lot of the books together. And these books, they're a bit like the bitmap books in that they're very high quality, glossy, well-written books that are very professional indeed. Oh, something's fallen out that one. Got a little advert there. As you can see, lots of reproductions of the adverts and covers and so on. Lots of interviews, obviously with the main people behind US Gold in particular in this case. Lots of bits about games and the coders and so on. So if you're after a historical look back at a particular company such as US Gold, then this book really is an amazing resource, and it's also a really good read as well. And on a similar note to that, US Gold's great rival, Ocean, the History, which was, I think, Fusion's first book, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it was their first book. And Ocean, obviously one of the biggest companies, software companies in the 80s, especially on the 8-bit computers, and also more about them here because obviously they lasted into the 90s as well. And this is a really, really fantastic look back at Ocean. Lots of interviews with coders and artists and employees of Ocean from back in the day. And it's a really lovely read and a superb nostalgic trip back in the day to when Ocean ruled the waves. Great book that is. And finally for Fusion, we've got the Crash Annual. Now they've done a couple of these now, Crash Annuals, and the next one's in the works. And they've also done Zap Annuals as well, but obviously as a Spectrum fan, the Crash Annual's my favourite. This is the latest one from last year. 2021 will be out soon, I believe. And this is hardback, A4 as you can see, a lovely Ollie Frey, original Ollie Frey cover there. And these are fantastic, these books, and they're very popular, and I can understand why, because they're lovingly produced. Obviously a lot of the people that used to work on Crash are involved. I've written a few articles myself for these because I absolutely loved Crash back in the day. Wrote a big feature for Eurogamer on the magazine and its history, and Chris and his team do a wonderful job of reproducing the feel of Crash for these annuals, and it's absolutely amazing. We'll have a look at it in a sec, but let's just have a look at the back as well. There's an advert there for Golem books and some of his books. I've not actually bought any of these. I'm quite interested in this one here, so I need to try and get hold of some of them. And yeah, a lot of art by Ollie, as you would expect. Lots of features. Anyone that read Crash back in the day, everything will look really familiar. That's the idea. There's lots of reviews of new games. That's the kind of key to it, that they're reviewing new games, obviously in the style of Crash from back in the day. And nice poster there. Let's take that out. And obviously the Crash smashes are being doled out as well. And then you have reproduction of sections such as Techniche, which was a technical section back in the day. And obviously articles as well, of which there are quite a few about the Spectrum. Got playing tips there as well, maps. Is that Nick there? Yep, that's Nick, who used to do the playing tips and even edited the magazine for a while. So really, really nice, colourful, as you can see. Look back at a particular year of Crash there. So lots and lots of stuff to get your teeth into if you're a fan of the Spectrum and Crash magazine in particular. So that's a very popular annual or book that Fusion produces, which yeah, looks like there'll be more of them to come as well. Now for my final book, it's new in a sense. This is my favourite gaming book of all time. So while it's quite old and it's been around a while, I had this book growing up as a kid, and it's written by Martin Amis, who's a famous author obviously back in the day and still today. And Martin got addicted to video games when he was younger, specifically Space Invaders, and he wrote about his experiences at the early point of the video game explosion. And I used to love this book growing up, and I don't know what happened to my original copy, but it became one of the rarest books ever, and on eBay it would go for regularly for 150 quid, but they reprinted it amazingly a few years ago, and obviously I grabbed it straight away when I saw that this was out. Now the great thing about this book is not only has it got obviously some great writing by Martin in it about his memories of arcade gaming mainly in the 80s, early 80s and late 70s, it's also got some great photos in it as well that you probably won't find elsewhere. So obviously of arcades. So that's a very nice photo of an arcade there. It's obviously got a lot of American leaning towards it, but also English as well. A lot of England arcades featured as well. So you get all these lovely photos. A lot of them are adverts and things from back in the day, but there's also a lot of stills of arcades and so forth that you wouldn't see elsewhere, which is really nice. A few people were playing arcade machines. Nice cartoon there. Pinball, section on pinball as well. Martin really likes his pinball. A lot of his memories and that about playing arcade games. And then as you move forward through the magazine, for the book rather, there's lots of hints about playing games, and also highlighting the different games that Martin played when he was a kid, and how to beat them as well. And it's all wrapped up in a theme of the alien invasion, as you can see, invasion of the Space Invaders, and how we, the humans, are fighting back. So there's a lot of tips on how to fight back, as well as all the photos. So very interesting historical book this. I recommend you get it. It's available from Vintage Publishing, $14.99 I think it is. And whilst a lot of the writing might be a little bit incongruous today, it's a very interesting look back in time to retro gaming. So there you go. There's my look back at the various retro books that I enjoy and love. Thanks for watching, and I'll post another video soon. Cheers. Bye.